What's up, everyone, and welcome to the show. This week, I'm really excited to have Seth Barnes here. Seth is someone who I've known for a long time. I think we got connected to each other through one of the board members of Adventures in Mission, Mark Gottlieb, and I think that he knew about the videos I was doing. He sent some of them to you, and then we got connected through that. And you're someone who I look up to a lot, and I am very impressed with and inspired by, and I've been wanting to have you on for a while because I think that you've done a lot to shape how I think about my place in the world, and I would love for you to share some of your knowledge with the other people who are out there and who could benefit from that as well. So, but before we even get into it, I mean, why don't you share just like a brief background on yourself and also your side of the story, how we met?
Okay, well, how do we meet? Yeah, it was Mark Gottlieb is his name. He's an inventor. He's a guy that has mentored you, I guess, a little bit some. And
Yeah.
and about Mark is, although he's been very successful in life, he can be thrown into any new circumstance, and he doesn't mind roughing it. Like just last couple of weeks ago, I said, would you go to Uganda and take some shots and some footage of the situation that's going on there, which is 2 million people from South Sudan as refugees in northern Uganda, and 4 countries impacted, people saying it's one of the worst crises of our times. And he just went right over there. It was great.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, actually, speaking of Mark, like while we're on the subject, one of the first things I like to just quickly jump into it. So, like one of the first things that comes to mind when you say that is that Mark is someone he has grandkids. He's the same age as you, and there's not a lot of guys like him who are willing to rough it.
right,
By the time you get
right.
to that age, especially if you're a wealthy, successful guy, that's a
Yeah.
very, very rare thing. And so I'd love for you to comment on that.
Yeah. But I was actually, it's funny, you was thinking about that today, and the image that came to mind is it's kind of like a burn victim. When you're a burn victim, it's very important that you continue to massage the skin, and you have to move your arms if they've been burned. You have to regain your flexibility. You lose flexibility, and I think that's what happens in life. We get so comfortable, we get so many resources, we get some obligations, we have stuff to do, and our ability to pioneer, do new things, just contracts until it's very narrow. And it's a kind of a sad thing. I watch a lot of my friends going through, and I'm like, man, go do something exciting, do something different. Why do the same thing all the time? It's just, boy, it's something you have to work on to stay supple.
Yeah, well, what would be your advice? I mean, it's obviously so rare, but you do tend to hang out with the type of people who somehow manage to not become complacent. So
Yeah.
what are the commonalities with these people who are in their 50s or 60s and they haven't succumbed to all of the dangers of comfort?
Yeah, I think you have to actually be intentional about stretching your spirit. So years ago, when I was close to your age, I purposed. I said I need to actually every quarter do something that really stretches me spiritually, and especially in the area of connecting with the poor, connecting with those of a different economic status than me. We're in the top 1% here in America. And so I just kind of realized that if I don't do stuff that will stretch me, kind of contract in my spirit. And so I've really tried to make that something that is a discipline in my life ever since.
Yeah, so what would be an example of a stretching exercise that you might recommend people do?
So there's lots of stuff you can do internationally, but locally, just go down to I mean, in every little town, even you'll find the other side of the tracks. You'll find people who make you uncomfortable. Here in Gainesville, Georgia, we have 1/3 of the population are Hispanic. Well, that's an awesome thing for me. I mean, I speak Spanish. I love to connect with them. There's a guy working on our house today, and he's from Huehuetenango, Guatemala, and we're doing some painting, and he's upstairs right now painting. Huehuetenango, Guatemala, that is where I started out in 1975. That's where I first kind of got a call to missions, and it impacted my life so much. And here he is in my own house. I mean, man, to not even have that little conversation with him that uncovered that detail would have been a mistake. So we got to find the other side of the tracks, and we need to go rub shoulders with people. And gosh, get on a plane. It's so cheap these days, and don't just go to the next resort. Do something that's more of a vacation with a purpose. There's all kinds of opportunities that we never used to have because of logistics and transportation facility that we didn't, in 20 years ago even didn't exist.
Yeah, so I think bringing up technology is very interesting because on the one hand, technology makes it possible for us to go anywhere and get anywhere faster than ever before, and probably safer than ever before, and more comfortably than ever before. So we can travel to so many different places. And then the trend that I'm noticing is that it seems like people in general, and I don't know what you think about this, but it seems like people in general are maybe adventuring less and taking less advantage of the opportunity to get outside of their comfort zone. And
Yeah,
is that it? Yeah, what is that? What are the forces that are causing that?
Well, we're talking about comfort, so there is this kind of, I don't know, we've made a god of comfort. Everything's got to be more comfortable, but there's also this other god of fear, and it's kind of interesting how I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they were saying something about how they were afraid to go to a place, and I said, do you realize that it's never been safer in the world ever than it is right now? It is so safe. You look at just the actuarial tables. I mean, we're living longer. What happens is you hear about all the terrible things that happen in the world because it's a global society, and there it is on Facebook, and it just happened. But the reality is that we're needing to get into more danger rather than more comfort, and it's never been easier. So why not do it?
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, that's a very straightforward sales pitch that you would think anyone would pick up on and take the bull by the horns and go do it, but many people don't.
Yep.
Many people, they get to 18 years old and then they pick the safest option, the safest college possible, and then they do that, and then after that they graduate and they go on to the safest job possible, and then they do that for another 40 years, and then they take the safest retirement possible. And what do you have to say about about that
There's a
line
lot of
thinking?
Yeah, there's a nurse that did a study a while back, and she said, what are the top 5 things that people wish they had done differently? And all these things were about regret. All these people had regret that they hadn't loved more, that they hadn't adventured more, that they hadn't risked things that they thought that they value but really didn't value, things that they wish that they had said that they didn't say. And I just think we live in a society that, the culture that you inherit doesn't have to be your culture. And why not be intentional about the culture that you're going to adopt? Anyway, so why not look openly at other cultures and what we can learn from them?
All right, so I think now I want to kind of backtrack because I think that what you just described is your own life path. Like you decided you had this culture that was enveloping you, and you chose a different path than what what the current was pushing you towards. And I'd love to hear about some of the thinking behind those decisions. And I know you had a very early experience. I think it was like right after college. So I'd love for you to tell that story real quick, and I have a few questions about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I wasn't always as big-hearted as I've become. I went down to Mexico 5 times, just driving from Chicago down to Mexico in college. Why? To go to the beaches. So it wasn't like I wanted to help people. And what did happen to me is I would read, and I just remember reading about the genocide going on in Cambodia in 1980, and it just shocked me. I thought, oh my gosh, what is going on there? And I realized I had a choice. I could either sit there and let life happen and just pretend like 2 million people weren't dying, or I could choose to do something about it. Now, it was,
so for those who don't know, would you mind summarizing what was going on in Cambodia at the time?
Yeah, so there's this crazy guy named Pol Pot and a group of people with him that comprised the Khmer Rouge. And they decided that following the Chairman Mao's edict of, the poor are the ones, the dictatorship of the proletariat should be installed, and so all intelligentsia should be killed. If you wore glasses, you were killed. If you had any kind of professional job, you were killed. 2 million people were wiped out in that genocide. And it was just a crazy experiment that ended after 4 or 5 years in failure. And so all these people are rushing to get out of Cambodia, and they're arriving on the border of Thailand as refugees, and just starving, just emaciated people. And I realized this is such an injustice, and I could potentially do something about it. So I found a way to get on a plane and went to a refugee camp and began to help. Hey, I lost your sound. Yeah, come back. Your sound's still in there.
What about now?
You got
Okay,
it. Yep.
my bad. All right, so here we go. Cambodia. Well, okay, yeah. What was it that you went and you did when you were in Cambodia?
I
You said you
I
wanted
had
to go
a
help. So what was it that you
yeah
went to
yeah
go
yeah.
do?
So I mean, your option is to just hand out food. I even back then I had businesses, and I've always had an entrepreneurial streak. I wanted to help people in more of a sustainable way, and so I found an organization called Food for the Hungry, and was able to build chicken and pig projects. We actually got 300 little chicks, gave them to a refugee, and the refugee would care for them and raise them to a place where they could sell them. Then they get to pocket the profit. Same thing for pigs. You get 5 pigs, raising them in maturity, and you pocket the profit. So it was a way of helping them get back on their feet, and it worked.
Okay. And so you had this experience where you were able to do something, tangibly help people, and then you went back to the States, and it's the land of comfort, the land of milk and honey. What was that experience like?
I was still a college student, so it wasn't like I had all kinds of resources. But
Yeah.
I did have a decision as my senior year. I had a decision, how was I going to live at that point? Was I going to go and get a job, or was there something more? And I did sense like there is something more, and I need to find a way to take this beautiful lesson that I've been given and continue on. And so I went to Indonesia, signed up with a group that at the time was called the Institute for International Development, now called Opportunity International, did micro enterprise work in Asia for a year, and then on to the Dominican Republic for a couple of years after that.
Mm-hmm. And what was the point where you, because at some point you started AIM where you wanted to get a lot of other people involved into some of the same work that you did. So
Yeah.
when did that click? Because that's something that I had a similar thing with DonorSee. Is I was working on things in Malawi, and then I thought, well, I want to get like more people involved. I want more people to have the same experience that I've had and learn some of the same things I've had. So when was that moment for you?
Well, first I had the personal experience that kind of activated me. So just by rubbing up against these people, seeing that they're real people, these are not abstractions. These are people that are in pain, and there's something that I could do about it. So this need that we all have for significance, to make a difference in somebody's life, I was actually able to do that. Go back home, and it's a lot tougher to make a difference in somebody's life, especially if you're younger. And so I thought to myself, what is it that I could do that would help? And really, the notion of helping other people have the same sort of experience that I did was something, that it had always been kind of bubbling in my head. And I had a good friend who was doing something similar. I joined up with him for a couple of years, and it was after that I started Adventures in Missions.
Mm-hmm. So now we live in a time where lots of people, I think there's a lot of people who they have plenty of valid excuses, and some of them are not so valid excuses for wanting to get involved in some of the things that that you and I have done. So, for example, some people might say, like, I want to go overseas, I want to help people, but I don't know how to do it. And there's ways around that. But other people, they might say, I want to go overseas, but I am just saddled with debt right now. I have so much debt and I couldn't possibly get away from it. What would you say to that person, that millennial age person who feels completely trapped underneath this like mountain
It's
of tens of thousands of dollars that
yeah,
they have to pay off?
it's a reality. It's over $1 trillion now, and it's huge. It can be overwhelming. I mean, I really think it was bad politics. The politicians, young people get into this place where they don't have many alternatives. They really compromise their freedoms So that's a sad thing. Given that, I think you have to you have to say what percentage of my income am I going to allocate to winding this obligation down, and then am I going to you got to ask this question: am I going to stop my life and my dreams because of some debt? So
Yeah.
let's say you have an aggressive path. Let's say it's $400 a month. That's almost $5,000 a year. Well, come on, that's just $5,000 a year. I mean, the average income for a family in America is like over $50,000 or so. So really, it's a question for me of lifestyle at that point. Like how high on the hog do you want to live,
Hmm.
and do you want to compromise your dreams? That's the real question. If you got dreams on yourself, don't not take risks on yourself just because somebody tells you that you've got to do this other thing first.
Hmm. So let's say someone says, all right, you answer the debt question for me, but I don't know what to do next. I don't know where to go. I don't know how to help. What do I know? Like I have a degree in communications. How is that going to help me feed starving kids overseas?
Well, the degrees, the specificity of your degree, I think, is a poor indicator of where you're going to end up. There's very
Mm.
little correlation between what your degree is and how you ultimately follow your call. I think you've got to, when you're in your 20s, recognize that, hey, just get some experience. It's Your 20s are a lot about a series of experiments that may fail, may succeed, and the stakes are not that high. You don't have the mortgage yet. You don't have to, if you're not married and don't have kids, you don't have that obligation. So go and take some risks. It's never going to get easier than when you're young.
Hmm. And another thing I've been meaning to ask you, I would love to get your thoughts on, is there are people who don't even see the need to travel. Like, there's plenty of people out there who don't think I don't need to travel. I am perfectly fine in this in this, like, living in America, getting a normal job, and they don't know what they're missing out on. And how would you advise talking to someone like that, someone who basically has what I would call like this first world bubble that they're completely comfortable in and they like it?
I think again, the issue of living your life from the grave backwards is probably a good idea. So
Hmm.
conceive of yourself as an 80-year-old man or woman, and you're getting ready to die, and all the dreams that you had, did you do them? All the people that you wanted to love better, did you do it? Did you help somebody? Did you, Seth Godin has a criteria. He said, how many people did you make cry in a good
Hmm.
way?
Yeah.
There's a lot more to life than just padding your bank account. Really, it's never been easier to live, and satisfy your basic needs than now. So gosh, I remember all I knew was I needed to get overseas. Didn't know how to do it. An opportunity came up in Indonesia. Next thing I know, I'm living in the slums. I'm just newly married. Something all the missionary companies tell you: never get married and go right overseas. Well, we broke that rule.
Yeah. Luckily, you had
Right over there,
some experience beforehand overseas, so it wasn't your first time, but still.
he hadn't, and
Yeah, yeah.
we were in a Muslim culture, and all the
Oh,
guys
wow.
were ogling her. She was blonde and beautiful, and they're trying to touch her. It was hard,
That-
but you have them
What
like,
was that first year of marriage like?
well, it was a lot of adventure. I
Yeah.
mean, we rode in the tuk-tuks. There's an open sewer in front of our house, which you go, oh, that's a terrible thing. But we learned how the other half of society lives, and we developed community. I mean, it was always an adventure. You had just an exotic culture that you never even conceived existed unless you're able to go live in it. And it's broadened my thinking in so many ways. It's such a gift, really, not just to travel, but to encounter people who are different than you and to open your spirit to them. And to miss that gift is just a shame.
Yeah, when you talked about getting to the end of your life and having something happen where you can say, at least I helped this person or I made this person cry. I had that experience when I was in Malawi and built the girls' school. Even the very first time I built one of the houses that we built, I thought, no matter what happens in my life, like if I die tomorrow, at least I did this one thing. Like at least I provided this school for this community, and I could like die tomorrow and I've still like left something on
So
this
many,
planet.
so many. I loved you. I love following you, Gret, because you just were always touching people and always making a difference. And it was awesome because it was also rare. Like, I'm looking at you and I'm like, why doesn't everybody do
Yeah.
this? Well, I don't get it. I mean, for me, it was just kind of normal. And that's why with the world race, we try and take people and put them in community and give them all kinds of experiences just so they can open up their box of kind of how should I conduct my life?
Yeah, what is your advice to the people who are on the world race, the ones who are around needy people all the time? What would you like if you could just the one thing, the one message you could send them right now, what would that be?
Wow. Well, I'm going to pivot a little bit here. At this point,
Okay.
no, I'll address your question, but I think I've been advocating for stretching your spirit. And here's where I really think, follower of Jesus, he said, it's better if I go so that you will receive the Holy Spirit. And so how is that? How is it that not having Jesus here is actually, it's better that he goes so that I receive the Holy Spirit? Well, that God does want to speak to us and that he'll communicate if we'll press into him. And if you can hear the voice of God, if you can hear him telling you, not necessarily everything to do that's right or wrong, but important indications about important decisions you have in life, that is something that is always a comfort. And he's called the Comforter. So I think people really, especially Christians who are following Christ, they need to listen to the voice of the Spirit, or learn how to listen to the voice of the Spirit.
Hmm. So your takeaway would be listen to God.
Absolutely. He wants to guide us. He wants to call us out. He wants to give us a life of adventure like Jesus had with his disciples. And we read it in the we think, I'm a Christian now. I'm following Jesus, but if you really look at everything that he did, it was crazy. And he was a revolutionary, and he did awesome stuff. I mean, he's raising the dead, and he said you're going to do even greater things than these. So I don't know what people think about those words, but they seem pretty radical to me, and I want to know, can I do that?
Yeah, so I'm this is something I talk about with a handful of my friends all the time is of we look at American Christianity and then we look at the way that Jesus acted in the Bible, and a lot of times we're pretty disappointed with what American Christianity looks like. Like we want it to be
Right.
more like it doesn't seem radical enough or it doesn't seem crazy enough. I think you were the one who at one point said like I think people are tired of coffee dates as being like the pinnacle of Christianity. Like just like that's so yeah, I mean what do you think about that? What do you think about the general idea of American comfortable Christianity and what
Well,
would you
yeah. I again, it's how we started the conversation. It is a problem. And the bigger problem is that we don't see that it's a problem, that we're really
yeah.
missing out on so much by not allowing God to lead us in crazy ways. I mean, I just always want to be available if he says go try and raise that dead person. I mean, that to me, that's like, wow, that would be the scariest thing, because what if they don't raise? What happens if you're a fool? But
Yeah.
I in my spirit, I want to be ready. I remember I was in Peru in 2009, and I was doing something, and somebody came running up and said, "Come quick! Yeah, my mother just died." And so I ran down, and sure enough, she had cancer. And I thought, okay, here's my chance. Here I go. I've never really
Yeah.
prayed for a dead person to be raised. I had lots of stories about it. And I prayed and said, "All right, Lord, is it time? Are you ready? Is this the chance that I get to see the dead raised here?" And I felt him saying, "No, you're here to comfort the family." I went ahead and prayed for that lady to be raised. She didn't raise, but we did spend a month with that family, comforting them afterwards. And so, I don't think I missed it by running down there. I think that there was more to the story, and I've heard of lots of racers that have prayed over the dead, and they've come back to life. So I know that it can happen.
Yeah, the whole idea of miracles, I think, is really a hard thing to grasp for people in our
Yep.
where we come from.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a question of our needs are met. So why bother praying if your needs are met? Context where praying for your daily bread, Jesus says, pray for that daily bread. And it's a real thing, because if you don't pray for it, maybe the bread doesn't show up and you're hungry that day. It makes a lot more sense to rely on God. And situations where we're dependent on him and where he needs to show up if we're even be able to live and go forward.
And I guess a lot of people would probably be wondering, why put yourself in that situation? Why put yourself in a situation where you fail? Like, why not just stay? What's wrong with staying at the pinnacle of civilization?
And it's a great question. It's a fair question. I think by knowing that God loves us and he wants a deep, intimate relationship with us. But you think about intimacy, and I'm fortunate. I've a wonderful wife of 37 years and deep intimacy. And intimacy requires that you lean into one another. It requires that you're really dependent on one another and that you're taking risks with one another. That's just the way any intimate relationship works. So I think it's true with God. God, we're made in his image, and he wants us to lean into him. And he wants us to feel like, what if he doesn't show up? And then he does show up. And it's like, man, you're so grateful then.
Yeah, I had basically a story happen when I was in Malawi, where there was this girl who was deaf. And actually, there was a team of racers who I was like chaperoning them or whatever for the month. And so there was this deaf girl in this remote village, and we went out and we prayed for her over and over again. And then, like, right before the racers left, we did this big, like, it was like 48 hours of fasting and 24 hours of constant prayer. And then it all culminated in us going to go visit this girl and ask God to heal her. And we prayed for her, and then it didn't happen. And I remember being pretty frustrated and upset, and kind of like this. God, you kind of owe this to me. Like, I did all this stuff. Don't you? What happens to, like, whenever 2 or 3 are gathered in your name? Like, what am I supposed to do with some of that? And then a few months later, like, by a million different things happening in a million different ways, that girl who was deaf, she was selected for this cochlear implant surgery, which is like a $50,000 surgery, and she got it for free, and she can hear now. So, like, eventually it did happen, and I mean, maybe the lesson there was, like, I need to trust and not demand things on my timing, and there's a lot there, but that was just, like, something that happened where
it's a tough thing. I mean, God is not a vending machine, and he's not somebody who just pop a quarter in and out comes the answer. A racer healed, came in with wearing hearing aids and was healed, and this happened just at training camp.
Mm-hmm.
So we know God. We know God hears. It's hard to know when he's going to answer the prayer, and I found that God often doesn't answer on the first prayer. He's like that persistent widow. He wants us to keep knocking. He wants us to keep asking. And why is that? I don't know. I mean, I wish I could just kind of say this is the way God always is, but oftentimes it's a mystery. I know that he is healing in places like Malawi, where you were. The churches are planted because of healings, and they go in, and that's their strategy, is to show the Jesus film and then pray for healing. When the blind and the deaf are healed, then they plant a church.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm looking at you right now. You're in your living room, which I've been in several times, and we've had a lot of meals in there. And I know that you have a nice house, and you have a couple cars, and you have a great family and stuff. And I also know that you're very, very familiar with a lot of the poverty that exists in the world. And I'm wondering, what do you? And I'm here in my nice house as well. This is not specific to you. So I'm wondering, how do you reconcile some of those things? Like, how do you reconcile the abundance you have with the absolute destitute poverty that exists in so many places? And what would you recommend to other people in similar situations to you?
Yeah, I think you got to hold it like this. Here's my hand, right? You got to just put it before God, and, like, you can take it at any time. I mean, even with my own family. So think about the things that are even more precious than material stuff. Your family members, or people you love, and I think you have to even put that before God. And what else does it mean to make him Lord if he can't tell you what to do? So oftentimes I'm a Christian, but we want all the control. And
Mm-hmm.
I think God he's looking to be Lord. And that means he can take it all away. I mean, look what he did to Job, and still Job loved him.
Mm-hmm.
We put ourselves in that place of just trusting God. Though he slay me, yet will I love him. So intimacy is tough. It's tough in marriage. It's tough with God. But I think it's a wonderful thing to push for. I think God wants it. No,
I know a
I'm
lot of
fine.
people are going to be asking why. Like, why would I want? Like, I want to love my kids. Why would I put them in harm's way? Why would I allow? Why would
Right.
I be okay with something bad happening to them?
Well,
People want to ask that.
yeah. I mean, that's risk, and there is no safety. There is no absolute security. Sometimes I think, what if my house burns down? Well, what if it burns? There's all kinds of things that could happen. But can you trust God? That's the bottom line. And is God a good God? If you can trust him, if he's a good God, he's not going to just visit all kinds of terrible things on your life to hurt you. He wants you to have abundance. But what he really wants to give you is relationship. And so, in relationship, you got to risk. The day, I don't think young people know how to risk very well.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of it comes from placing too much value on temporary, tangible, materialistic things, like valuing your house too much, or valuing.
Or even control, or a lot of my generation over mothers and over fathers their kids, and so they're like present in every situation. They want a text and a report on every, the date that you just had, how did it go, blah blah blah. And it's like, get a life, mom and dad. I mean,
Yeah.
go do something that is, make your own life. I mean, at some point, it's normal for young birds to leave a nest, and we haven't kind of figured that out as human beings here in America. And I think we need to be prepared to give everything of value up. He's a good God that we can trust. And if you can just be clear about those two things, that he is good, he's not going to do terrible things to you to punish you, and you can trust him, and if you can get there, you can live a wonderful life. If you never get there, you'll live with regret at the end of your life.
Yeah. Okay. So another thing that I want to ask you about is there's a lot of atheists who watch my videos and kind of tune into this stuff, and I know we're talking from a place where Christians, it's like get your butts in gear, like open your minds and stuff. But what would you say to the atheist who says God doesn't exist and I don't need to do anything apart from my own comfort? What would be the first thing you say to them?
It's a good question, and we live in a very kind of agnostic culture. I watched the movie The Case for Christ last night. It was about an atheist who really was antagonistic towards God, and his journey to kind of be able to set aside all of this, not just skepticism, but antagonism. And I think there's a difference between rational skepticism, which is, I'm a rationalist. I kind of look at everything in terms of, does it make sense? And just this antagonism that is really not rational at all, to just kind of wipe away the possibility there might be a God and that he might be a good God. I mean, I know people who have died. I know a couple of people that have died, have gone to heaven, met God, gave him kind of a tour of the afterlife, and it was real. And they wrote books about it. And it's, for me, go talk to that person. They were pretty convinced. It completely changed their life. And I've seen so much evidence in my own experience. I mean, at some point, you have to recognize that there is no perfect kind of risk-free faith. Faith is always going to either have faith that God doesn't exist or faith that he does exist. Either way, it's risky and it requires faith.
Yeah. So just to pivot, we live in probably one of the more chaotic times in human history in terms of like what technologically and maybe socioeconomically and so forth. It seems like it anyways. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm in my own bubble. But we live in this like really chaotic time where things are developing really quickly and really fast. And I'm wondering if you have, how do you deal with some of that? Like one of the things I wonder about is like, are we going to have like amazing technology, or is it going to turn into something that really damages our relationships with one another? And I spend a lot of time being anxious over this stuff. And
But the answer to that is it's already happened.
yeah,
I mean, it really has. Young people, especially, but guys my age as well.
oh,
We
I see what you're
really
saying.
we get to the point where recent study 40% decline in empathy rates in young people. 40%. What does that mean? That means that the capacity to be empathic has been diminished by 40% just because of social media. You can unwind why. There's lots of studies as to explaining why, but I think we need to interact with people, and instead of interacting with people, we're interacting with emojis, and there's the consequence. So yeah, we don't have to worry about it. It's already here. I think we need to figure out how do we get back to principles that are design principles by which we should govern our lives. And a lot of people don't think in terms of design principles. They just kind of live from one chaotic moment to the next. And I like to pull back. I think you need to periodically do maybe a 2 or 3 day retreat and say, all right, what is my life really about? And what should it be about? And how do I design my life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, let's say there's a bunch of people watching this right now and they don't have a lot of close friends, but they want what you're talking about. Where do they start? Like, how do they design their life in a way that that they can get some of their empathy back?
Well, for me, I mean, I'm as tempted as anybody. I just got to get off Facebook and have some people over for a party instead.
Mhm.
And
That's
put,
yeah.
put, put away for God's sake. I mean, here's this iPad, and here's this, and I'm on technology, and I've got this thing here. I just got to put them down. And I'm as tempted as anybody else. But I got grandkids now, and every moment that I'm kind of on technology is a moment I'm not having a tickle fight with my grandkids. So I got to somehow figure out about priorities. I don't know. That's
Yeah.
basic.
But so on an individual level, I can see how like an individual might be able to tackle some of these issues. Like an individual might say, I personally am going to like look at social media less. I'm going to make an effort to invite more people over. But don't you worry about the societal impact that this is having? Because like I guess my wager is
Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
majority of individuals are not going to have the discipline to do what you're talking about.
At some point, I don't know, Greg, it's like I could worry a lot. And there's a guy named Richard Rohr that I follow, and he wrote a book called The Naked Now. And he
Yeah.
says most religion is about learning to just live in the present, learning to live in a way that you're at peace because you're free from worry. You're free from the what ifs. You're free from the regrets. You're living in the now. And whether you believe that or not, I think there's a truth there. I think that we need to consider our thought life and take control over our thoughts. And that's again where we have the Holy Spirit to help us do that. But gosh, if you don't live intentionally, it's been given to you all the time without asking questions, I think you're in trouble.
Yeah. So well, I understand the principle of living in the now in order to stave off anxiety, but also you can't there, you still have to do some planning, right, to some extent.
You're thinking, okay, you're like an ostrich then if you're just sticking your head in the sand because there's all this stuff is going on in life. I like a principle that Stephen Covey gave us in Seven Habits. He said there's a circle of influence and a circle of concern. And from his perspective, the best way to live life is to maximize your circle of influence. And the circle of influence is inside the big circle of concern. Lives with a big watermelon-sized circle or oval of concern and a very small circle of influence. And so, I do think it helps to kind of look at, maybe even draw a picture of the two and say, well, how big is my circle of influence? And do I want to grow it bigger? What would I do to change that?
Yeah. Well, Seth, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me, and I would love to give you a chance to provide any last words for the people watching. I think like the whole theme behind this channel is to burst your first world bubble, and I like so badly. I want people badly to understand their place in the world. I think that would solve, especially people in America. There's so much complaining and whining, and we just like live in the nicest society in all of history, and
Yeah, so pick a place, and care about it. So, for you as Malawi, and you're probably, you talk to Prince, so you still care, and it's in your heart. And I think a lot of people, that's kind of lodged in their heart, and there's not those relationships that could come there. And for me, recently it's Uganda, and I'm going to care about the people that are coming south from South Sudan to try and eke out a life. And so I'm all about that these days. So what about you? Mr. and Mrs. Listener, who are you caring about? Where do you care about? If you really want to, exercise some influence, start caring about specific people instead of just a broad problem.
Yeah, that's a good. I like that. There's a guy who just tuned in to what we're doing, and one of the things that he talks about a lot is what's going on in Yemen, just the
Yeah,
40,000 kids who died. And the videos are really awful from that. But he's made it his mission to write about that and talk about that and bring awareness to that.
I love. Didn't you recently write about this, or somehow it came to my attention? I thought it was you, Gret, and because of that, I put it out there to my staff, and one person gave $1,500 to Yemen relief. Now, there's a tangible way of caring instead of just kind of sitting there in a place of passivity or anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I hope that I think that I appreciate talking to you because you are good at both the really big abstract ideas and the really tangible, practical stuff. And I think that that's very helpful. Okay, last thing. Would you say you're generally hopeful or despairing of America as a country?
Yeah. Well, you look at our leaders, and it's easy to despair. I mean, they're a bunch of knuckleheads. It's just crazy, crazy stuff. I mean, no wonder you're anxious if you're watching that. I mean, it's tough stuff. At some point, I just turned off all the politics, and I said, this is making me crazy.
Yeah.
Am I generally hopeful? Well, like I said, it's never been safer. It's never been easier to go out and live a life of your dreams. Yes, from the perspective of how many are actually doing that or recognizing that they have that opportunity, it's discouraging. And I love it when I can tell you so many stories of young people who have put everything at risk, and the lives that they're living of incredible just excitement and the changes in lives that they're seeing. So that gets me really pumped up, and I just want to see more people doing that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Seth, for your time. I know you're busy and you have a big office to run, so it means a lot that you would do this, and I just want to say thanks.
Thank you, Gret. Thanks for having me on, and God bless all you out there who are wrestling with these issues. They're tough issues. They're important issues, and God loves you. And I think knowing that makes it easier than if you're just kind of stuck in a place of nihilism.
I think that's a very good way to end it. All right. I'll talk to you later, Seth. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Bye.